I'm Susanna Palitz. I'm the director of OTTRS, the Organizational Teams and Technology Research Society. We are a group that is centered at the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland, but we include researchers from across the DC area. And this organization is interested in everything teams and technology. And I'm very pleased to be introducing our speaker for today. And I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. It's Snehesh Shrestha. Can you introduce
Yeah,
yourself and your name and then?
sure. My name is Snehesh Shrestha.
Yes, so I did that wrong. Note what he said. But he is a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland College Park. He works in the Perception and Robotics Group lab at the Department of Computer Science under the guidance of Dr. Alomonos, and I think I've butchered his name even worse. And he works with a variety of researchers at UMIACS in the Information College and the School of Music, as well as in psychology in the Cultural Lab. Additionally, he works at NIST, developing new standards toward recommended practices for the design of human subject studies in human-robotics interaction. His research is at this intersection of robotics, artificial intelligence, human factors, arts, and culture. He's interested in multidisciplinary research aimed at building rich and intuitive experiences that amplify human abilities, empowering people, and ensuring human control, as inspired by Dr. Schneiderman's Human-Centered AI book. His recent work is focused on human-robot interaction and AI for music education. And so it's with great pleasure, given our multidisciplinary focus, that we have him here speaking today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction, Susanna. I will share my screen and get started. All right, oh, there we go. Okay. All right, can everybody see my screen? All right, okay. For today, it would be great if you guys have any questions to interrupt me and ask questions. And that way, perhaps I can integrate the answers into, if the answers are coming up in the upcoming slides, so that I understand what questions are there. So feel free to jump in anytime and ask questions. We don't have to wait until the end. So today, the focus of my talk will be multimodal human AI interaction. And here I will start off with this slide where if you ask, for example, I have a Google Home. If I ask it to turn this light, it has no idea. So it says, sorry, I don't understand. So we'll start off with this kind of like setting the mood for the rest of the talk. And we'll look at how this direction has led me to the research that I did, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I work in the Perception and Robotics group in Computer Science department, and I have worked in the Cultural Lab with Dr. Michelle Gelfand. She's now at Stanford. I've also worked with Dr. Huaishu Peng while keying for him, as well as creating a video annotation tool. And then I continue to work with Dr. Cornelia Vermüller, Dr. Irina Marisano, and Dr. Gagao on a regular basis towards my work and also under the guidance of Professor Yannis Almonos. So like Susanna mentioned, my work is at the intersection of various kinds of disciplines. And I'm not going to go over it again, but so I go a little bit of background. I'm not going too much into it because I would like to cover a lot of material. My robotics journey sort of began at my undergrad school at Elizabethtown College, where me and my friends started a robotics club because we really wanted to build robots and go participate in this competition called Intelligent Ground Vehicle Competition. And so we raised $35,000 and built this robot, and we went and competed at the robot competition. And then for my senior project, I tried to build autonomous home assistant, which was supposed to pick up laundry and do vacuum clean, all while being powered from a mobile device. And then that led me to my job at Qualcomm, where I worked for 9 years. One of my proud projects that I worked there was we developed a robotics development platform, and we developed a wheelchair robot that would assist elderly or anybody who would like to, who are disabled, to shop, to find groceries or any kind of shopping using autonomous system. And so this was some of the projects that I worked before joining University of Maryland in 2016 for my PhD. So around 2018, I took a class with Dr. Jen Goldbeck. And in that class, as you all might know, she's fond of Ghostbusters. And so that was the theme of the class. And me and my partner in the class for the project, Lydia, we developed this drone and a gun that you shoot at the drone. And basically the idea was we had to build some kind of project around Ghostbuster theme. And so our idea was, it was a Ghostbuster academy where you train the Ghostbusters to learn to shoot accurately so there would be less collateral damage. And so the idea was basically to create a gun that would shoot out laser, and using photovoltaic cells, it would detect the charge of the laser, and then that we can use this to count the number of shots fired, and then we can start to increase the complexity of the motion of the drone. That way, the user has to practice at it being static or moving slowly or moving in complex motions. So this was the basic framework, and I'll show you a short video of what the final project looked like. You can see me here in the back controlling the robot. I purposely turned off the sound because there is some narration that is not relevant. But as you can see, people are trying to shoot the robot, and in the back over here, there's a counter every time they shoot, and this is all happening wirelessly, and I'm controlling the drone from here. I'll move ahead a little bit to a more advanced level where I'm moving the drone up and down. And this part is not that hard for me. But now once I go to the higher level where the drone needs to now move around in a more complicated patterns, this is quite difficult for me to do. And that's what we are behind the safety net, but also for me being able to control accurately, as you can see, I'm struggling quite a bit. Okay. And so that led to sort of like first kind of understand why is it difficult to learn how to control the drone. So basic dynamics of the drone. So there are many configurations of the drone, but this is like your basic drone with the most common one, which is the quadcopter. This is the X configuration, and in X configuration, the opposite rotors are arranged in the same direction. That way the moment force cancel out, so it doesn't continue to rotate. And so by using these properties, what you can do is to rotate the forward ones faster or slower to pitch forward or backward, basically tilt forward and backward. And that's how you move ahead, similar to a helicopter. And by changing the left and right speeds, you can tilt left and right, and by creating a yaw, creating a roll. And then by changing the speeds of the corresponding opposite ones, you would create a difference in moment, and that would create a rotational force called the yaw. So these are the basic principles of flying the drone. Now, what really happens is that when we typically operate on the ground, and we have eyes in the front, and that's why we have a language of left, right, front, back, right? So that's our physical embodiment. So we have a lot of robots that have similar physical embodiments, such as the vacuum cleaner Roomba. Your car has a similar physical embodiment where it goes forward, different turning radius and such, but still has a similar dynamics. And so does if you have a humanoid, which is the Baxter. This is called Baxter, and this is the robot that I work with. And they all have a similar embodiment in the sense that the direction is similar. There's left and right. Now with drone, as it moves, its frame of reference changes. And so then now, depending upon where you stand and where the drone is, all of a sudden now you have an difference of frame of reference. So now immediately you, without having good training, it becomes very difficult to control this drone. Not to mention, it also has an up and down motion that we normally don't have to deal with in the 3 robot examples at the bottom, for example. So, so why is it difficult? Is like, so first we gotta have a hand-eye coordination. We have to be trained to properly and precisely control the joysticks. Second has a continuous changing orientation. And then there's a little bit of delay between the time you send the command from the time the robot makes the motion, and then the effect of the motion is felt. So this loop is that delay makes it difficult, because now you have to anticipate and be trained on that. And then depending upon the in the location, whether it's the robot is in your line of sight or not, you might also need to localize and map. And this might also be for the robot itself as well. And then really learning the sensitivity of the controller itself. And then finally, once you create a motion, unlike on the floor, where floor has a lot of friction that's pushing you back, in air there isn't that much force, so you have to account for the inertia as well to go for the drone to go in the desired trajectory that you want. So can we interact a little bit more naturally? This seems very difficult, and at least I was having a lot of difficulty. So this was my first hunch as a PhD student, was like, can we create a little bit more natural way to control the robot? So let's try to, initially I said, let's try to learn to fly a drone without any human training. But then I reduced that to without too much training, right? And so immediately came to mind is, what if we just use gestures? And so we did that. We did a paper for a class, and we used the standard air marshal controlling that they use to direct airplanes or helicopters. And it basically has basic list of gestures, and these are static gestures that you can do. Some of them are dynamic, a lot of them are static gestures, and these are very distinct from each other. But you really have to learn the new language of controlling the drone now. And we did achieve acceptable amount of accuracy, not perfect accuracy, but acceptable amount of accuracy. However, the gestures were sort of like mapped, right? Like, so when you look at the data set, basically people were doing this very pronounced, very and deliberate gestures, very dramatic gestures. Nobody was just doing this, right? So, and then, and the difference between each of the different classes of gestures were quite different. So the classifier had a pretty easy time in classifying these gestures. Now, in reality, for example, in our data set, the reality is quite complex, and people don't move so deliberately. They only sometimes move, maybe sometimes they not move. The movement might be very subtle, and oftentimes the movements are very, very similar. So the reality doesn't quite match the data set that exists. So this created a new problem for me, because I couldn't really translate the first we had to learn all these symbols, different symbols, instead of using controller. So what was really happening was not so natural, right? And what we really did in that case was, instead of learning to use the buttons, then we had to memorize these poses or gestures that we still had to learn them. And we had to recall them at the right time to be able to control them. Another problem with that is that it was discrete. It could only make discrete motions, right? Like, so you couldn't move only by only a little bit amount in this direction. So that made it not very desirable. So then we took a step back and tried to look at, so what is the nature of control and autonomy in human robot interaction? And so this is inspired from Dr. Schneiderman's book, Human-Centered AI. And so in this one-dimensional perspective, which is an older perspective, people usually think about devices being either on one spectrum of being high level of autonomy and high level of control. So there's no autonomy all the way at the left, but high level of control, and full autonomy on the right-hand side and low level of control. But this kind of handicaps us because this kind of makes us not be able to think about situations where we might want high level of autonomy, but also have high level of control, and vice versa. So, so excessive human control, for example, on the left-hand side, and excessive automation on the right-hand side. So we looked at what is really happening with the controller versus the robot, right? And so as the complexity of the robot changed, the complexity of the controller was also changing. So drones were still on the lower end of the side, but imagine you had to control many degrees of freedom, humanoid, and you had to control it directly, right? So then that would become quite complex. So in order to control that is complex, you would need some level of abstraction in order to be able to control well. So we can look at the different, which is the two-dimensional framework that Dr. Schneiderman proposed, where you want to, there are some examples of, for example, bicycle and piano requires a lot of skills, at least in piano, and so you need a mastery of the skills. Meanwhile, operating, for example, airbag, you almost don't want to be responsible for pressing any buttons for the airbag to deploy because it would be too late. Meanwhile, in elevator and digital cameras, while it has decent level and a very high level of autonomy in terms of what it's doing under the hood, you still get a decent amount of control to be able to do the things that you want to do. And it even has advanced modes, and maybe not in the elevator, but definitely in a digital camera, it has advanced modes and your quick point and shoot modes. So coming back to our case, when we want to learn the violin, for example, that requires high level of human mastery. And this is just a plugin for the later part of the talk. And in our case, our drone controller is somewhere in this area. Now, what we really want to do is be able to control the drone, but have high level of autonomy, but also high level of control. So we looked at what are the existing mechanisms of controlling the drone. So there's various different ways people approach this. The video you saw, I was using an alternate one, which is using a screen, which is sort of like your front FPV style viewing of what the drone sees, as well as you have the inertial sensor to be able to kind of control the similar dynamics of the robot. And here are various other ones where using motion capture system, gesture even, and using your muscle from the EMG to be able to kind of control the drone. The gesture, I must point out here, was released by DJI, but it was a very static gesture, and you had to hold them for a long time, and you had to move very, very slowly. So which wasn't really practical again. So controlling robots what does like a new paradigm in a shared autonomy look like? Is there were other ones where they're using VR controllers to control the robot, where robot did a lot of the inverse kinematics, and that the person was just working on the endpoints here. Another one where it's using a combination of motion capture system as well as a motion capture system as well as the human body pose capture system connect, which is over here, that's observing the person move, and as a combination, they were trying to control the drone. A humanoid where the hand is being held, so basically sort of like reinforcement learning as well as learning by demonstration. And this was done in our lab where we were trying to teach a robot. This is not me, this is my previous lab mates and my professor's work, which was basically learning from YouTube videos and parsing concepts that the recipe of the person was demonstrating and constructing in a language that the robot could then execute. And then finally, we have our beloved Google Home and Alexa that we can talk to using our natural language. However, it is, even though it is natural language, it is it's mostly glorified lookup table. So if you say it in a different way or use words that are there, it's not really in its table, then it doesn't really work quite well. ChatGPT has been doing, and such models, large language models, have been doing a much better job at this. So which will not be covered today, because this research has started way before that. But I will still cover a part of the models. So let's look at what is the relationship and roles between teams of humans and robots. Some people might not like the idea of robot being a team, but we needed a word to represent a group of robots that are collectively working together, and or a human when we needed the same word to represent those groups. So and this is an established literature from human robot interaction. And here we have basically either groups of human or groups of robots, or individual human and individual robots that are being in some kind of permutation, where either teams of human controlling a single robot or teams of human controlling teams of robots, and all the permutation and combination. So these are some of the combination, not all. But this gets the general idea of, gives us a paradigm to kind of think about what is the configuration, what is the nature of your setup, so that it gives you a framework to kind of think about what are the interaction that's possible. So most of the interaction I'm going to talk about is configuration 1, which is one robot and one human. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to collect natural gesture data of people that, without giving them any instruction, just giving them the drone, and we just want them to try to control using the gesture. And what we were doing here was we were using a Wizard of Oz setup, where we basically deceived the participant into believing that drone is already capable of flying using gestures, and really somebody else is remotely controlling by watching them through the camera. And so we set up this experiment where we set up this simulator, and it was sort of like a video game where you would see a target and you would see some kind of trajectory line that would kind of help you, guide you in the direction that you needed the ball to go, the drone to go to. Once it hits the ball, the virtual ball, it would turn green, and then the ball would move to a new spot, and the drone had to follow. By doing this, we could get directional commands that people would need to do to control the drone. And basically what we told them was we're going to time them and collect them in order to try to get them to do whatever comes naturally to them. And so here's an example. This is go higher, and then the drone hasn't reached yet, so we're giving some reinforcement that they need to continue to go give higher. And we also wanted to see if they would just use gestures, or they would also use speech. And what we noticed was people were not. Some people were using gesture, and some people were not, and some people were just purely just using speech. So that led us to the question. Was like, do people even want to use gesture? And is gesture is even a feasible way of controlling a robot? And while it looks cool in movies, does it really make sense in a practical sense? And would we, if the drone, if a robot came to our house, would we actually be using gestures or other kind of mechanisms, or what would be our preferred mechanism interacting with the robot? And so whatever data we collected, they were first, it was not realistic because it was very limited, and discrete steps, and only in limited direction. So we would only get 8 to 10 classes. So this is what we would get very little data in kind of finding out. So we decided to, this natural keep coming up is like, what is really natural way of talking, natural way of using gestures, and other things that people do naturally in the process of communicating. And so sort of to define natural gestures, we kind of look into what is really natural. When you look at the standard wave, I'm calling it the standard wave, but you're really just waving your palm, your hand. But there's also, you can wave all the way from the elbow. There is also the Hawaiian wave. You have the finger wave, and of course you have the Queen's wave. These are all waves, and so really, natural is just what you prefer and what people would use. And in fact, a lot of people might use the same gesture to mean something else, or different gestures to mean the same thing, for example, in this case. So a natural for one person might be different from other. So we really wanted to see, given a paradigm, a given a situation, the kind of speech and the kind of gestures people would use. So along that line, we wanted to see what was the pipeline in a human given a command to control a robot in order to achieve a task. This is a task completion here. So human gives a command, robot receives the command, performs the action, human makes an observation, and then gives the next command. So this is your standard way you would interact with your conversational agents, such as Google Home or Alexa, things like that. Oftentimes now in the newer version, the Google Homes can ask follow-up questions. So let's look at an example of the prior example that we saw is a person says, turn off this light. And then Google Home says, I don't understand, right? Sorry, I don't understand. Another thing that might also happen is if they turn off this light and they say, that's even worse, which is like turning off all 17 lights. And that is not what we want. So really what we want is some way of making sure or repairing this problem when the robot doesn't quite understand. So how do humans really do this? It's like if a person says, turn off this light, and the person is not sure, they will confirm, saying the lamp in the corner with a very specific information, both spatially, that is, so they can come to a common ground and come to a common understanding. And then the first person says yes, and the person turns off the light. And so there is a acknowledgement and a iterative process, even though it may seem these are happening very quickly. People, even with a little gesture such as nods, people are constantly giving acknowledgements and confirming that they are understanding that we should continue to move on. A real life anecdote, this was a true story. When I was young, my mom would point at kitchen stuff, for example, over here, and would point at pots and would say, pass me the plate. And I would be very confused at the beginning. But then over time, I learned that she didn't really mean the plate. And this is something you would see for couples that have been together for some time, that they start to understand, even though they say something else or they mean something else. And I guess that's what sometimes they call chemistry. But I think people start to develop this intuition about what people mean using multiple modality and not just what is said exactly. And this idea of the way we program a computer versus the way we interact with the computer should be quite different, because the way we program the computer, we want to make sure that it is precise. But the way we interact with the computer, we want it to be able to learn and figure out and have this process of iterative process in order to help us achieve our goals faster and more efficiently. And so, I clearly would bet, do you mean the pot? And she's just like, that's what I said, right? So what does it really look like, the flow here? So, so a human might give a command, and that might be the original command, for example, and the robot might send back an accept, right? A response, for example, a nod or yes, I got it, or something like that, right? Then human might evaluate what was being said, and if the human thinks it's complete, then you might terminate that particular command. But there might be a problem, and the human might say, for example, can you please get me the onion? But as soon as I say onion, I might realize I really mean tomato. So I might say, I mean the tomato, right? So I initiated a repair myself. So this one's called a self-initiated repair. And so then a second command, repair command, would be sent, which is, I mean the tomato. And that's now the robot's responsibility. And now we got two things in the command, which is, can you get me the onion? I mean the tomato. Now the robot needs to understand that there are one is incorrect command and the other one is correct command. So it needs to really understand this command, right? Which was initiated by the person. Now the human might send a command and robot might not understand or misunderstand. In that case, if the robot initiates repair, for example, as let's say there are two apples and the human says, pick up the apple. The robot could ask, which one, right? And then the human might say, the left one. And the robot might pick up the apple. And so there's a sort of like an iterative process in trying to repair the interaction to achieve the task. And so why multimodal is like One way to say is cut the tomato, and this is simple, so you can cut the tomato. But if the robot really doesn't know what the tomato is, then you have the burden of needing to describe and give a lot more reference, which is cut the red round object to your right. Right. This is quite laborsome. How do people really do it in real life? Is they might just say cut that, right? Just pointing, or just hold it and say cut this. Right? That's one example. There are many other ways to do it. Or turn on the light. And if you have to say turn on the Maryland bedroom master light, that's quite a mouthful. Or you could just say, like in the previous example, turn on this light, or turn on this light, in the sense that you might be pointing, or you might just be in that room. So the context tell you that there's only one light, so that's the light that needs to be turned on. So these are giving additional constraints, which is a different modality from purely speech. And so we created an experiment. First of all, we created this simulator in Unity where we take a Baxter robot and we created a full kitchen. What we want people to do is we interact with the robot in order to the robot to cook a particular dish, in this case, a soup. Similar to our earlier setup, we create an elaborate Wizard of Oz setup. People are given instruction, as you can see over here, of what needs to be done, and their job is to communicate that to the robot in order to achieve the task. And they are not aware that somebody is controlling. So in their mind, they are. I think my headphone went out. Okay. I will just. Oops, about that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Right, so human might give a command, and the robot's going to try to execute that, right? And so the human thinks that the robot is actually understanding. Meanwhile, researcher is really controlling the robot. So this is basically paradigm. But in order to really collect, we need to go extra steps in order for the participants to really believe that the robot is actually acting on its own. And we have to avoid a lot of pitfalls that might happen in this data collection process. So I'm going to talk about a paper that we did about different considerations to minimize data collection bias. For example, the effect of instructions that you provide. The first one is the text. And so we played with initially we just provided text for the robot to for people to say, and they just read it out, and there was no variation in different people's command, which is like the cut the potatoes, make the robot cut the potato, so they would say cut the potato. There was no variation in the word potato or the cut. This wasn't working, so we wanted to change that. So we created a video. Instead of using the words, we wanted them to come up with their own words. So we created a video here, and then here's an example of me cutting. And you think this would be good. However, now because I'm cutting a certain way, this has started copying the way I move in order to just mimicking my movement as the gesture, which is not what we want. We wanted them to spontaneously be able to come up with them. So the third method we came up with was cause and effect method, where we would show the beginning state of the of an object, and then we would show what would happen after that desired action is done. And we would just, for example, the knife is approaching and the knife leaves. And this seemed to work really well, where we're getting a lot of variation in the data. The other one is because this was a Wizard of Oz setup, we needed them to really believe that the robot was acting on its own and nobody was controlling. However, in the beginning part of the experiments, somebody was clicking the mouse and they could hear it. And they figured out pretty quickly that somebody's controlling just because of the timing. And so we need to take extra measure in making sure either we had to go to a different room, but because of the just the complexity of the lab, we just decided to go with a soft key remote control that we reprogrammed to pass IR signals that the computer receives and then controls the robot. Another thing that happened, actually, this was quite devastating for us because in our first study where we collected data for roughly 30 people, what we did not realize was during the practice session, the last part of the practice session, we
our design was the participant would have a conversation or just have a few commands in speech with the robot. What that did that was all the other practice of using gesture was negated because they believed that they didn't have to use gesture, speech was enough. So almost every participant just spoke and did not use any gestures. So this was not good for the study because it was the validity was gone. So then finally, we wanted to see the effect of background noise. What would happen, because really we thought by adding background noise, people would be encouraged to use more gesture. So we wanted to see, is that really true? Or in what cases people use gestures and people do not use gesture? And then so when we played around this audio at different decibels and different kinds of audios, what we noticed was that people would just adjust to the sound audio and not really, this wasn't really affecting them, and they were starting to tune it out, unless it was so disturbing that we couldn't even conduct the experiment. At that point, it didn't really have any value because we couldn't even hear the person. So we didn't think the background noise had any effect, so we decided to remove that as a control parameter. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that people's pronouns and people's words choice they used wasn't very gender or very personality specific. So we looked into designing the face of the robot such that it would appear as neutral as possible, so that we wouldn't bias them to use either a gender specific language or any other kinds of language, whether it's friendly or dominant or things like that. And so we created this face, which was the most neutral face according to this measure. And then once we collected the data, we wrote a software called FIVA, Fast Event Annotation Tool. And this video annotation tool is really helped us quickly be able to annotate a lot of our videos. And so if you're also interested, you can just go to snehesh.com/FIVA, and you can also use this software as openly available. And then so we annotated all our data. And this is the first version of the data here, where now you'll see both what's happening in the simulator as well as the people interacting synchronously, and you will see the text, whatever the person says in the text, and the gesture being represented in the form of these poses. Okay, and so this is not the actual session. This is the trained result. So trained result, and okay. So breaking down the data set, we used 6 different cameras to actually 7 cameras to record the participant from various different angles. We have heavily annotated data, and we also further broke down the data into various parts. For example, we broke down by modality, whether every command, whether it has speech or not, and what was the speech or any command referencing to, whether there's an action reference or an object reference, and if there's gesture, whether it was task intent or it was non-intent, in the sense that they were scratching their hair, or they're just moving around or folding their arms, which is not really relevant to the task. So non-task specific ones are also categorized because those are not relevant motions that the machine learning algorithms need to learn. And then finally, which body part is being used for the gestures. And we also have robot trajectory in terms of exactly how is the robot moving, where the robot is with respect to everything, and the states of everything in the kitchen. As well as there is 8 different cameras from various different angles that you can use to look in have a different view of the scene of what was happening. Also, the egocentric view, as you saw earlier in this scene. I will stop right here. So as you can see, there's the RGB, the depth, the instance segmentation and the semantic segmentation that you can also help to train your machine learning algorithms. So first benchmark task we did was for robot learning. And this was multimodal human task understanding. So given a natural command, such as cut that into slices, and someone's pointing. So the pointing is represented as key point gestures, key points, sequence of key points, sorry. And the cut that into slices are just then represented in the form of text. And then this is then the goal is to generate a LTL, which is a linear temporal logic. What linear temporal logic really does is it breaks it. It's a formula that has a specific structure. It's a grammar that breaks down the complex tasks into multiple simple or subtasks that the robot can execute, and also creates a grammar of in what execution and what precondition, as well as what condition needs to meet for something to be complete. And so this gives us a powerful language to take the natural command. So if we can convert them into linear temporal logic, then the robot can execute them pretty easily. So we wrote a based on existing large language models, not super large by today's measure, but we use two different models, BART and T5. So audio is processed into speech, and the text is then fed into one of the encoder, T5 or BART, and then you would get text embedding. Similarly, we trained LSTM-based gesture encoder, and it would take the sequence of gesture and then represent into a similar size vector, and the fusion transformer network would then learn to generate the sequence. So basically, it's a multimodal translator into generating, instead of having language to some other language translation, now it was a multimodal translation model. And for measuring the performance, Blue Score what basically does is it measures the text, and so we were getting very high accuracy even though it wasn't accurate. And so Jacker similarity was slightly better because it does intersection over union. And then, however, the best, well, I guess second best is the spot functional equivalence. But basically, it takes the formula of the LTL and it measures with the ground truth whether functionally they are equivalent or not. And if there's not, then it's basically a binary score at the moment. It doesn't give you partial scores. And the best method would really be to get the LTL formula and actually execute in the robot. And if it is successful, then you would then get a score. However, the training with that would be a little bit more difficult and time consuming. So you probably want to do something with the spot score first. And after reaching a certain point, we could do further down training. This is planned for future work. Okay, so that was version 1. Version 2, this is ongoing work. So we did a second part of the study, which is cross-cultural study on multimodal repair strategy used in natural human-robot interaction. So we've basically looked at cross-culture in almost 2 different dimensions. The first dimension is whether you're a native English speaker or not. So we took 2 groups of people. People recently immigrated to America from China, and Americans who were born here and most of their life have been here. The distribution was fairly split down the middle. There are roughly 2,600 interactions, of which 33% are purely speech only. Only 7% is purely gesture, and 59% is a combination of speech and gesture. And out of there, almost 17%, 454 instances were for repairing the interaction between them. And so the repair strategy was inspired from Clark's work from the 1986, where he had looked at a different experiment where tangram figures needed to be arranged between 2 participants, and they needed to communicate how it needs to be arranged in order to give a very specific pattern of these triangles and square shapes. You would have to kind of communicate back and forth. So then they evaluated how that original information was repaired in the following one. And really in their work, the primary things that showed up was repeat, expand, and replace. Repeat is basically kind of repeating the same thing just in case the person didn't hear you. Expanding is adding more information, and replace is really swapping the keywords or changing, like instead of saying put the square on the top, we might say put the square higher or something, right? So and you're just changing, swapping out the word. And then in our data, we noticed slightly different, or actually a lot more variations, which is we definitely saw repeat, and definitely saw expand, and definitely saw replace, but we also simplify because people thought the robot couldn't understand, so they tried to simplify whatever they said. Another thing they did was they thought maybe their structure was too complex, or maybe the way they said it wasn't quite clear, so they would rephrase the same thing. So basically the content was the same, but the structure changed. And then the rest, originally at phase 1, we marked them all as, if it didn't fall into this category, as unclassified. However, further looking, we found a lot more interesting things, which is something that something usually we don't quite see in a lot of data set is a reset command. But however, when you see people interact with robots, we notice this all the time, which is you start off with a command and you get frustrated that the robot is not able to understand. So you want to reset, saying you basically say, forget what I said, and I want to reset, or can we start this again, or something like that. And so, and this is a important kind of repair that's important, because if a robot doesn't understand that, and it just continuing to concatenate everything that was being said before, then the reset command really cancels out everything that was said before, because they want to restart. And so this is quite an important type of repair. Another one is inquire, which is sometimes they're not sure what happened, so they kind of check on the robot. This is a different kind of repair, because it's not really repairing the content of what was being said, but they're really repairing the interaction. They want to make sure that they're being heard, or the robot understands something is. So they are trying to repair the repair. And then reprompt, which is, for example, reprompt is if I say something and then I see that, or if I want to say something, but I'm not really sure how to say it because the first way I said it, let's say the other party did not understand. And now I'm trying to say it, but then there's no way for me to say it. So I could reprompt you by, for example, like saying whatchamacallit, like and these are the ways that you would kind of try to reprompt them into participating, helping you get to the things that you want to communicate. And then another one finally is sometimes people just want to, like, you know what, they don't want to continue with this command, they want to move on. So there's also this cancel and give up commands, which is I think is there in current systems as well. So this is all linguistic. This is all speech-based. So we looked at non-linguistic ones. Also, this is just a structure. This is non-linguistic one, ontology. So when we look at verbal, non-verbal, gesture. So what happens? Some of the things people do is the same thing like speech. They repeat the same gesture again. Another thing they do, which is different when they expand over here, is they think that the robot couldn't see the amount, so they make it a little bit more dramatic. And so the motions are much larger. So if I just point it over here, then I might point it much bigger. The other one is try to get attention, because let's say I point at something, and then in case the robot missed it, I'll just hold on my pointing for a long time, so that to ensure that the robot actually sees it. And then another way is to sort of reiterate and enforce, and then I call it loop. Basically, people would do the same gestures over and over again. For example, this one, this one, this one, this one. Like they would just keep pointing, and they might not say this one, but they will just keep pointing over and over again. And then finally, demonstrating a task, which is if they're not sure, then they might kind of show how to do it, or even if it's in air, like sort of like a charades game. And then finally, if we're not sure if it belongs to one of these parts, then we put under unclassified. And for a non-verbal but speech would be paralanguage. So here we looked at intonations, for example. And so one of the things people do, strategies people use, is they think that maybe a robot didn't understand the word, so they might speak slower, kind of like how they would treat a baby or a child. Another way they do it is they speak louder, kind of anticipating that maybe they didn't hear you. Sorry, the robot didn't hear you. Another one is trying to enunciate the words clearer the second time. Or they might put more stress on keywords, or even every word actually. So they try to. So this is a way of repairing it by just saying the same thing, or even if it's different thing. But the clarity of each word is better. And then finally, a cross-modal one, which is sort of a combination of verbal and nonverbal. If in the earlier original command there was no speech or gesture, they might add it in order to make it more information, and they might do remove it, which is they might think there's too much information and the robot might be confused, so they might just remove one of them. And then another thing that people did, which was they try to synchronize with the keywords, for example, specifically gesture. For example, if I said pick up the tomato, then I would be like pick up the tomato. I would point right when I said the word tomato. Or if I'm doing the pickup gesture, then I would be pick up the tomato. I would not do pick up the tomato, right? So that would seem a little bit non-synchronized. Even though people might not be paying attention in the original command where it might not be synchronized, in the repair part, the action words, the keywords and the gestures seem to be a lot more synchronized. Oh, and how are we doing at time? Okay, actually. All right, so then I don't think I have enough time to go over the violent stuff. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank many students that I got an opportunity to work on throughout my PhD. And these are just people who made major contributions. There were a lot more people who spent either a week or a month, and then either because of classes or personal situation, they were not able to continue, whose names are not even here. So I had the pleasure with working with over 60 people, but these are just the major contributors who made a major impact and have gone on to do great things, or continuing to do great things. So I definitely want to recognize their effort and say, send a special shout out to them and say thank you. And also want to say special thanks to Levi, Chetan, Anton, who've been tremendous help in all my research, and to Roger and Ian, and also from the IMD, who have also been very, very helpful, and everyone at PRG Lab. It's a great community, and everyone is always there to help. And a lot of talented people in PRG Lab. So it's been a great environment and a great place for me to do research. And so thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, I guess I can take them now.
Yes, thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciate, personally appreciate the multidisciplinary way in which you are looking at, how humans interact, and then how robots then need to interact with humans. We actually don't have a ton of time, but we definitely have time for one or two questions. People should feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I can moderate them and read them out loud so the recording can get them.
Sure.
I will go ahead and ask a question. In your future work looking at cross-cultural differences, are you do you have any colleagues in other countries where you might be able to do some work with them?
I have a collaborator in Hong Kong that I'm speaking with at the moment for a specific work. And I did work for the Violin project. I actually worked with somebody in London. This was specific to art, where so we built this, which would have been the second part of my talk. We built a haptic band that it helps you design feedback that you can provide to people. And this is being used for as a feedback mechanism for people to improvise when they perform. So they did a couple shows in London where the singers and the singers were using around their neck, and then cellists and violinists were using on their arms to get feedback, live feedback on how the people are feeling, and accordingly they were improvising. So I do have a few collaborators. Oh, I also I have a collaborator for in Mexico for speech synchrony.
That's very cool. I really want to express my appreciation both for you coming and speaking today, and also for what you're doing and how you're doing it. I love that it's so well integrated across different disciplines to really understand what's going on.
Thank you so much.